I didn't know that one glance could save a man's life, or destroy mine in the process. The air inside the restaurant felt heavier than usual that night, thick with perfume, polished wood, and something I couldn't name but couldn't ignore either. I was 20 years old, 3 hours into a double shift, my feet aching in cheap black flats that had long since lost their support, balancing a tray of crystal glasses that cost more than my monthly rent. The place was the kind where men in tailored suits spoke in low voices and women wore silence like jewelry, where everything looked perfect until you paid attention to what people weren't saying. I tried not to look at the corner table, but something kept pulling my eyes back there. For men sat too still, too focused, their conversation barely a whisper, yet somehow louder than the entire room. One of them kept checking his watch. Another tapped his finger against the table in a rhythm that didn't match the music. And then there was him. He wasn't sitting with them. He stood across the room near the bar, like he owned the air everyone else was breathing. Dark suit. No tie. Calm, but not relaxed. The kind of calm that made people step aside without being asked. I didn't know his name yet. I didn't need to. You don't grow up in a city like this without learning to recognize power when it walks into a room. I turned away, telling myself to focus on my job, to keep my head down, to finish the shift and go home like every other night. But then I saw it. A movement too subtle for anyone who wasn't already watching too closely. The man at the corner table slid something under the napkin. Not money. Not a phone. Something smaller. Something deliberate. And the way his eyes flicked, not toward his companions, but across the room, locking for half a second on the man by the bar, sent a chill down my spine that had nothing to do with the overactive air conditioning. My fingers tightened around the tray. I wasn't supposed to notice things like this. People like me survived by not noticing, by not getting involved, by pretending that the world of expensive suits and quiet threats had nothing to do with us. But my heart didn't care about survival in that moment. It beat too fast, too loud, because I understood something I wasn't supposed to understand. Whatever was about to happen, it was meant for him. I swallowed hard, forcing my legs to move, carrying the tray toward another table, but my eyes betrayed me again, drifting back to him. He hadn't moved. Not even an inch. But something in his posture shifted, like he felt it too. Like the room itself had changed temperature. I don't know what made me do it. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was stupidity. Maybe it was the quiet, stubborn part of me that refused to look away when something felt wrong. As I passed behind him, close enough to catch the faint scent of something clean and expensive, I let my hand slip just slightly. Not enough to drop the tray. Not enough to draw attention. Just enough to tilt a glass, to create a small, almost invisible reflection of the corner table in the polished surface. And then I stilled. My eyes met his for less than a second. I didn't speak. I didn't dare. But I held that look just long enough, just steady enough, hoping he would see what I saw. Hoping he would understand what I couldn't say out loud. His gaze sharpened instantly, like a switch had been flipped behind those dark eyes. He didn't look at the glass. He didn't look at my hand. He looked at me. Really looked at me. And in that single, silent moment, I realized something terrifying. He understood. The shift in his eyes was instant, sharp enough to make my breath catch in my throat as if I had said something out loud instead of nothing at all. He did not nod, did not react in any obvious way, but the stillness around him broke in a way only someone paying attention would notice. His hand lowered the glass he had been holding with precise control, and for a second, everything in the room felt suspended, like the moment before a storm when the air goes quiet and heavy. I forced myself to keep moving, because stopping would have been the mistake that gave everything away. My steps carried me past him, toward a table that suddenly felt miles away, my pulse pounding so loudly I was sure someone would hear it over the soft music. I set the tray down with hands that I hoped looked steady, though I could feel the slight tremor in my fingers, the kind that comes when your body understands the danger before your mind can fully catch up. Do not look back, I told myself. Do not draw attention. Just finish the job. But I could feel it. The change. Conversations continued, glasses clinked, a server laughed too loudly near the bar, but underneath it all, something invisible had shifted direction. I risked a glance anyway, just for a fraction of a second. The corner table was no longer relaxed. One of the men had straightened, his posture tighter, his attention no longer fully on his companions. And the man by the bar, the one I had warned without words, was no longer alone. He had not moved far, maybe only a few feet, but now there were two others near him, positioned in a way that looked casual if you did not know what to look for, but deliberate if you did. I turned away again quickly, my chest tightening. I should not have done that. I should have stayed out of it. People like him did not need help from someone like me. People like me did not survive long when we stepped into worlds we did not understand. I picked up another order, repeating the motions I had done 1,000 times, but nothing felt automatic anymore. Every sound seemed sharper. Every glance felt heavier. And then it happened. Not something loud or obvious. No raised voices. No scene. Just a subtle ripple through the room, like a current shifting under the surface. The man at the corner table reached for the napkin again, but this time, before his fingers could close around it, someone else was there. Not touching him. Not stopping him. Just standing close enough that the message was clear without a single word being spoken. The man froze for half a second, then leaned back slowly, his expression carefully neutral. From across the room, I felt it again. That presence. I looked up before I could stop myself, and there he was, watching me. Not the room. Not the men. Me. His gaze held mine for a second longer this time, not questioning, not confused, but certain. Like he had already made a decision, and I was somehow part of it. My throat went dry. I looked away immediately, focusing on the check in front of me, the numbers blurring together as my mind tried to catch up with what I had just set in motion. I had not just noticed something. I had changed something. And deep down, in a place I could not ignore, I knew this was not over. Not for him. And definitely not for me. I tried to convince myself it was over, that whatever had almost happened had been quietly erased, smoothed out beneath polished floors and expensive silence. But my body refused to believe it as my hands continued moving through the motions of my shift while my mind stayed locked on that single moment when everything had shifted direction. Orders came in, plates went out, and I nodded when customers spoke, but I did not hear them, not really, because every part of me was listening for something else, something I could not name but could feel building just beneath the surface. The corner table eventually cleared, not abruptly, not dramatically, just gone in the way powerful problems disappear when they are handled by people who do not leave traces behind. And yet that only made it worse, because it meant whatever had been stopped had not been small. I told myself to breathe, to finish my shift, to leave, to forget, because forgetting was the only way people like me stayed safe. But then I felt it again. That presence. Not across the room this time. Closer. Too close. I turned before I could stop myself, and there he was, standing just a few feet away like he had always been there, like the space between us had never existed at all. My heart stumbled, then raced, and for a second I forgot how to speak, how to move, how to be anything other than aware of him. Up close, he was even more controlled, every detail deliberate, from the way he stood to the way his gaze held mine without hesitation, without apology. "You should not have done that," he said quietly, his voice low enough that no one else could hear, but steady enough that it cut straight through the noise around us. I swallowed, forcing myself to hold his gaze even as my instincts told me to look away. "I did not do anything," I answered, though we both knew that was not true. One corner of his mouth shifted, not quite a smile, more like acknowledgement. "You did exactly what you meant to do." The words were not an accusation. They were a fact. And somehow, that made it harder to breathe. I glanced around quickly, suddenly aware of how exposed I felt standing there with him, but no one was paying attention. Or at least, it looked that way. That did not mean they were not watching. "I was just doing my job," I said again, softer this time, needing it to be true even if it was not. His eyes studied me for a moment longer, not in a way that felt invasive, but in a way that felt precise, like he was measuring something I could not see. "People who are just doing their job do not notice things like that," he replied. I felt the truth of that settle heavily in my chest, and I hated how easily he had seen through me. "I should go," I said quickly, stepping back before I could second-guess myself, before I could get pulled any deeper into something I did not understand. But his voice stopped me before I could take more than a single step. "They will notice you now." I froze. Slowly, I turned back to him, my pulse rising again for a completely different reason. "What do you mean?" I asked, even though I was not sure I wanted the answer. His expression did not change, but something in his eyes sharpened, something colder, more certain. "You were not supposed to be part of this," he said. "Now you are." The words settled between us, quiet and absolute, and in that moment I realized something I could not undo. I had not just changed his night. I had changed my own place in it. The words stayed with me long after he walked away, not loud, not dramatic, just there, steady and impossible to ignore, like something had quietly shifted into place inside a life that used to feel simple. I finished my shift on autopilot, forcing my hands to keep moving, to stack glasses, to wipe tables, to nod at customers who smiled without really seeing me, but every second felt stretched thin, like I was waiting for something I could not predict. When the clock finally passed midnight and the manager told us we could close, relief did not come the way it usually did. It felt different. Heavier. Like leaving the building would not mean leaving whatever I had stepped into behind. I changed in the back room, pulling on my worn denim jacket, checking my reflection in the small mirror that made everything look slightly distorted. I looked the same. Same tired eyes. Same pulled back hair. Same girl who had walked in hours ago. But I did not feel the same. Not even close. The walk to my car was only a few hundred feet across the parking lot, something I had done dozens of times without thinking, but that night every step felt deliberate. The night air was cooler, quiet in a way that should have been comforting, but was not. The distant hum of traffic, the flicker of a streetlight, the faint echo of a door closing somewhere behind me, everything sounded sharper, like my senses had been turned up without my permission. I told myself I was being paranoid, that nothing had actually happened, that I had imagined the weight behind his words. "They will notice you now." The sentence repeated in my head as I reached into my bag for my keys, my fingers brushing against them just as I heard it. Footsteps. Not loud. Not rushed. Just there. Behind me. I froze for a fraction of a second, then forced myself to turn slowly, my heartbeat picking up again as I scanned the dim edges of the lot. Two figures stood near the far end, partially shadowed, not moving, not speaking, just watching in that quiet way that made my skin tighten. Maybe they were just other employees. Maybe they were waiting for a ride. Maybe this was nothing. But instinct does not argue with logic. It reacts. I turned back quickly, unlocking my car with a sharp click that sounded too loud in the stillness, pulling the door open faster than usual, my movements controlled, but urgent in a way I could not fully hide. "Do not run," I told myself. "Running makes it real." I slid into the driver's seat, locking the door immediately, my hands gripping the steering wheel as I tried to steady my breathing. "It is nothing. You are overthinking. Just start the car. Go home. Forget everything." But before I could turn the key, a shadow crossed the passenger side window. My head snapped to the right, my pulse jumping, and for a split second I could not breathe. Then I saw him. Not the men in the distance. Him. Standing there like he had stepped out of the darkness itself, calm, composed, completely unaffected by the tension tightening every muscle in my body. He tapped lightly on the glass, once, deliberate, not demanding, just enough to pull my attention fully to him. I hesitated, every instinct clashing inside me, but something in his expression, something steady and certain, made my hand move before my fear could stop it. I unlocked the door. He opened it smoothly and leaned down slightly, just enough that his voice reached me without carrying into the night. "You should not be alone right now," he said quietly. I tightened my grip on the wheel, forcing myself to meet his eyes. "And whose fault is that?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. That same almost smile touched his expression again, brief and unreadable. "Mine," he said simply. Then he straightened, stepping back just enough to give me space, but not enough to feel like he was leaving. "Drive," he added, his tone shifting just slightly, not a command, but not a suggestion either. I hesitated for one more second, then turned the key. The engine came to life, but the feeling in my chest did not settle. Because deep down, I knew something I could no longer pretend was not true. I was not going home alone. The engine hummed beneath my hands, low and steady, but nothing inside me matched that calm as I pulled out of the parking lot, my eyes flicking once to the rearview mirror before I could stop myself, half expecting to see those two figures still standing there, half expecting them to follow. They did not move. Or maybe they did, and I just could not see it anymore. Either way, the feeling did not leave. He stepped away from the car as I started to drive, not rushing, not lingering, just there one moment and gone the next, like he had already decided exactly how this would play out. I told myself to focus on the road, on the familiar route home, on the streetlights passing every few seconds like markers of something normal, something safe, but my mind refused to settle. They will notice you now. The words echoed again, quieter this time, but deeper, like they had already taken root. I made it 3 blocks before I realized I was not alone after all. Headlights appeared behind me, not unusual, not threatening on their own, just another car on a late-night street, but when I turned right and they turned right, when I slowed at a light and they slowed just enough to stay behind without pulling up beside me, something in my chest tightened again. It could be coincidence. It could be nothing. But instinct does not care about coincidence. It counts patterns. I adjusted my grip on the steering wheel, forcing myself not to speed up, not to make it obvious that I had noticed, but my breathing changed anyway, shallow, controlled, the way it does when you are trying not to react. Another turn. Another set of headlights still there. I swallowed, my eyes moving between the road and the mirror, calculating distance, time, options, all the things I had never needed to think about before tonight. This is what he meant. Not danger that announces itself. Danger that waits. Watches. Follows. My phone buzzed suddenly in the cup holder, the sound sharp in the quiet car, making me flinch before I could stop it. I glanced down for half a second, just enough to see an unknown number lighting up the screen. I should not answer. Everything in me said not to answer. But something else, something tied to the man I had just left behind, made my hand move anyway. I tapped the screen, bringing it to my ear without taking my eyes off the road. "Hello," I said, my voice lower than usual, controlled but tight. "Drive straight for 2 more blocks, then take the left onto Maple." His voice came through immediately, calm, precise, like he had been waiting for me to pick up. My grip tightened. "You are following me," I said, more accusation than question. A pause. Then, "No. I am making sure they are not." My eyes flicked to the mirror again. The headlights were still there. My pulse jumped. "Who are they?" I asked, the question slipping out before I could stop it. Another pause, shorter this time. "People who do not like being interrupted," he answered. The understatement sent a cold line down my spine. I reached the next intersection, my signal clicking. As I turned left onto Maple like he had said, my movements automatic now, guided by something I did not fully understand but could not ignore. The car behind me hesitated for a fraction of a second before following the same turn. My breath caught. "They are still there," I whispered, more to myself than to him. "I know," he replied, his voice unchanged, steady in a way that grounded me even as everything else felt uncertain. "Keep driving. Do not look back again." I wanted to argue. I wanted to demand answers. I wanted to stop the car and walk away from all of this like it had never happened. But instead, I kept driving. Because deep down, I knew something I could not deny anymore. I had stepped into his world. And there was no simple way out. I kept driving exactly the way he told me to. Straight lines, steady speed, no sudden turns. My hands locked on the wheel even as every instinct inside me screamed to do the opposite. To turn, to hide. To break away from whatever invisible line I had just crossed. The headlights behind me did not disappear. They stayed at the same distance, never too close, never too far, like whoever was inside knew exactly how to follow without being obvious. My phone remained pressed to my ear, his silence on the other end not empty but controlled, like he was listening to something I could not hear. My breathing grew tighter with every block, the quiet residential streets around me offering no comfort, only shadows stretching across the pavement under dim streetlights that flickered as I passed. "Where are you?" I asked finally, my voice low but edged with something I could not hide anymore. "Close enough," he replied, and something about the way he said it made me believe him even though I could not see him anywhere. I glanced at the mirror again despite his warning, just for a second, and that was enough to confirm what I already knew. They were still there. The same headlights. The same distance. The same quiet persistence that felt more threatening than anything loud ever could. "Do not look back," he repeated, softer this time, but firmer. "Focus on the road." I forced my eyes forward again, swallowing the panic rising in my throat as I followed the next set of directions he gave, another turn, then another, each one taking me farther from the route I would normally take home. "Where are you taking me?" I asked, the question slipping out before I could stop it. "Somewhere they will not follow," he said, simple, direct, like there was no room for doubt. I wanted to argue, to demand something more than that, but I did not. Because deep down I knew I had already made the decision the moment I answered his call. The streets changed gradually, the quiet residential blocks giving way to wider roads, then to an area I did not recognize, cleaner, quieter in a different way, the kind of quiet that came from distance, from separation. The headlights behind me slowed slightly at one of the turns, hesitating for just a moment before continuing, and that small pause sent a wave of tension through me that made my grip tighten even more. "They're still there," I said again, my voice barely above a whisper. "I know," he answered, calm as ever, and then after a brief pause, "Stay in the left lane. When the light turns green, go straight. Do not hesitate." The traffic light ahead turned red as I approached, forcing me to slow, to stop, my heart pounding so loudly I could feel it in my throat. The car behind me stopped too, a few car lengths back, its headlights steady, watching. The seconds stretched longer than they should have, each one pulling tighter on my nerves as I waited for the light to change. Then it did. "Green. Go," he said, and I pressed the accelerator, moving forward without looking back, without thinking, just following his voice like it was the only thing keeping everything from falling apart. I crossed the intersection, the engine steady beneath me, and for a moment nothing changed. The same road, the same night, the same feeling. Then I checked the mirror again. The headlights were gone. Just like that. No turn. No fade. Just gone. My breath caught as I scanned the empty stretch behind me, my mind struggling to process how something so constant could disappear so completely in a single moment. "How did you do that?" I asked, my voice quieter now, more disbelief than fear. There was a brief silence on the line, then his answer came, measured, almost distant. "I did not." They decided not to continue. The way he said it made it clear there was more behind those words than he was willing to explain, and something in my chest shifted again. Not relief, not exactly, but something close. "Slow down," he added after a second. "You are safe for now." For now. The words settled heavily as I eased my foot off the gas, the tension in my shoulders refusing to fully release. Because if this was what safe looked like in his world, I was starting to understand just how dangerous everything else could be. The silence that followed should have felt like relief, but it did not completely, because the kind of quiet that comes after something dangerous rarely means it is over, it only means it has paused. I kept driving, slower now, my hands still tight on the wheel even as the road ahead stretched open and empty, the city lights softer here, more distant, like I had crossed into a place that did not belong to the same world as the one I had just left behind. My phone was still at my ear, but neither of us spoke for a few seconds, the space between words filled with everything that had not been said yet. "Where am I?" I asked finally, my voice steadier than I expected. There was a brief pause, then his answer came, calm as ever. "Somewhere quieter," he said. "Somewhere they will think twice before coming back." The way he said it made it clear that this was not random, that every turn, every street, every second had been chosen with intention I could not fully understand. I exhaled slowly, my shoulders lowering just a fraction, but the tension did not leave completely. It stayed, coiled tight beneath the surface, like my body was not ready to trust the silence yet. Can I go home now? I asked, the question simple, but heavier than it should have been. Another pause. Longer this time. Not yet, he replied, and something in his tone shifted just enough to make my chest tighten again. I glanced at the empty road ahead, then at the dark shapes of houses passing by on either side, all of them quiet, unaware, untouched by whatever had just unfolded around me. I do not understand, I said, more honest than I intended to be. I just saw something. I did not do anything. His response came immediately this time, firm but not harsh. You saw the right thing, he said. And you chose to act. That is enough. I swallowed, my grip tightening again as his words settled in, heavier than before. Enough for what? I asked, even though I was not sure I wanted the answer. Enough to be remembered, he said quietly. The simplicity of it sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the night air. Remembered by who? I asked, my voice softer now. By the people who should not have seen you at all, he replied. The truth of that landed hard, forcing me to face something I had been trying to avoid since the moment I lifted that glass. I had not just noticed something. I had made myself visible in a world that depended on people like me staying invisible. I took a slow breath, trying to steady the rising wave of uncertainty building inside me. So what happens now? I asked. There was a shift on the line, subtle but real, like he was considering something before answering. Now, he said, you stay where I can find you. The words were not spoken like a command, but they carried weight anyway, the kind that does not need force to be understood. I glanced at the road again, then at the dashboard clock glowing faintly in the dark, the minutes passing quietly while everything else felt anything but. That is not really a choice, is it? I said, a small edge of defiance slipping through despite everything. For the first time since I had heard his voice, there was the faintest hint of something different in it. Not amusement. Not quite. Something softer. Not yet, he admitted. The honesty caught me off guard, leaving me with nothing to push back against. I exhaled again, slower this time, the tension in my chest shifting into something more complicated, something I could not easily name. Because deep down, I was starting to realize something that unsettled me more than the fear had. Part of me had already stopped trying to leave. The road stretched ahead of me in long, quiet lines, the kind that made it feel like the rest of the world had fallen away, leaving only the sound of the engine and the steady rhythm of my own breathing. But even that began to shift the longer I stayed on the line with him, the fear no longer sharp and immediate, but settling into something deeper, something that lingered. Where do you want me to stop? I asked, my voice calmer now, though the tension had not disappeared, only changed shape. There was a brief pause, like he was considering more than just distance or direction. There is a gas station 2 miles ahead on your right, he said. Well lit. Cameras. Stop there. I nodded automatically, even though he could not see me, my eyes scanning the road ahead as I drove, counting the passing street signs, measuring the distance without realizing I was doing it. The lights appeared sooner than I expected, glowing against the dark like something solid, something real, and for the first time since I left the restaurant, I felt a small sense of grounding return. I pulled into the station slowly, choosing a pump near the front where the overhead lights were brightest, where everything felt visible, open, exposed in a way that made it harder for anything hidden to exist. I put the car in park, but did not move to get out, my hands still resting on the wheel as I took a slow breath. I am here, I said quietly. I know, he replied immediately, and something in the certainty of that answer made me look up instinctively, scanning the area around me, the other cars, the empty spaces, the small convenience store with its glass windows reflecting the harsh white light. I did not see him. That did not mean he was not there. A few seconds passed in silence, and then he spoke again, his voice slightly lower this time. Stay in the car. Do not unlock the doors for anyone else. The emphasis on the last word did not go unnoticed. I swallowed, my fingers tightening slightly against the steering wheel as I nodded again, even though it was unnecessary. What are you doing? I asked, needing something, any piece of understanding to hold on to. Another pause, shorter this time. Making sure the problem ends here, he said. The simplicity of the sentence did not make it easier to process, and yet something in the way he said it carried a weight that felt final, like whatever had been following me was not something he intended to let continue. I leaned back slightly in my seat, my eyes moving across the parking lot again, taking in every detail now, the flicker of the fluorescent lights, the distant hum of a passing truck, the quiet normalcy that felt almost surreal after everything that had just happened. Minutes passed, though I could not tell how many exactly, each one stretching longer than it should have, my mind replaying the night over and over, the moment I made that signal, the way his eyes had changed, the way everything had shifted after that. Then my phone moved slightly against my ear as his voice returned, softer now, but still steady. "You did not hesitate," he said. I frowned slightly, the statement catching me off guard. "What do you mean?" I asked. "When you realized something was wrong, you acted," he continued. "Most people do not. Most people look away." I let out a small breath, my eyes dropping briefly to my hands before lifting again. "I almost did," I admitted quietly. His response came without pause. "But you did not." The words settled into the silence between us, simple but heavy, carrying more meaning than I was ready to fully unpack. I shifted slightly in my seat, the tension in my shoulders easing just a fraction, replaced by something unfamiliar, something that felt less like fear and more like awareness. "Why do you care?" I asked finally, the question forming before I could stop it. There was a longer pause this time, the kind that made me think he might not answer at all. Then, when he did, his voice was quieter than before, more measured. "Because you chose to see me," he said. "Not just look at me. See me." The difference in those words lingered, pulling something deeper into focus that I had not been ready to name before. I leaned back slightly, my gaze lifting toward the windshield, the bright lights reflecting softly across the glass as I processed what he had said. And for the first time since this all began, the fear inside me shifted again, not disappearing, but making space for something else entirely. Something that felt a lot like the beginning of a choice I did not fully understand yet. The words stayed with me longer than I expected, settling somewhere deeper than fear, somewhere quieter but more permanent, like something inside me had shifted direction without asking for permission. I sat there in the car under the harsh white lights, my hands finally loosening their grip on the steering wheel, my breathing steadying in a way that felt unfamiliar after everything that had just happened. The night had not changed around me. The same gas station. The same empty parking lot. The same distant hum of traffic. But I was not the same person who had walked into that restaurant a few hours ago. Not even close. "Are you still there?" I asked softly, not because I thought he had left, but because the silence felt different now, less tense, more deliberate. "Yes," he replied, his voice just as calm as before, but something in it felt closer, like the distance between us had shortened in a way that had nothing to do with space. I nodded slightly, even though he could not see it, my eyes drifting across the glass storefront, catching my reflection for a moment before looking away. "What happens now?" I asked, the question coming out slower this time, more thoughtful than afraid. There was a pause, longer than before, the kind that suggested he was choosing his answer carefully rather than simply responding. "Now you go home," he said. The simplicity of it surprised me, and for a second I did not know how to react. "That is it?" I asked, a small trace of disbelief slipping through. Another pause, shorter this time. "For tonight," he clarified. The way he said it made it clear that tonight was only a part of something larger, something neither of us had fully addressed yet. I leaned back in my seat slightly, my gaze lifting toward the windshield again, watching the reflection of the overhead lights blur softly against the glass. "And tomorrow?" I asked quietly. There was a shift on the line, subtle but real, like something unspoken had just moved into focus. "Tomorrow," he said, "we make sure this does not happen again." The word "we" did not go unnoticed. It settled in my chest in a way that felt heavier than anything else he had said so far. I hesitated, my fingers tapping lightly against the steering wheel as I considered everything that had led to this moment, every choice, every instinct, every second I had not looked away. "You are asking me to trust you," I said finally, my voice steady but careful. No, he replied, and for the first time there was no pause, no hesitation in his answer. I am telling you that you already did. The truth of that hit harder than I expected, because he was right. I had trusted him the moment I made that signal. I had trusted him when I answered the phone. I had trusted him when I followed his directions without knowing where they would lead. I exhaled slowly, the realization settling into something I could not easily push aside. I do not even know your name, I said, the thought surfacing as something strangely important now. There was a brief silence, then his answer came, clear and steady. Adrian. The name lingered in the air between us, simple, but carrying weight. Emily, I replied without thinking, the introduction feeling almost automatic, like something that should have happened hours ago. I know, he said quietly, and something in that response sent a small, unexpected shiver through me. Of course he did. I should have expected that. I glanced around the parking lot one last time, the tension that had filled it earlier now gone, replaced by something calmer, something that felt almost normal again. Almost. You should go, he said after a moment, his voice returning to that steady, controlled tone I was starting to recognize. Get some rest. I hesitated for a second longer, my hand moving to the ignition but not turning the key yet. And you, I asked. Another brief pause. I will be where I need to be, he answered. The ambiguity of it did not surprise me anymore. I nodded slightly, more to myself than to him, then finally turned the key, the engine coming to life beneath me once again. As I pulled out of the gas station and back onto the road, the night no longer felt empty. It felt watched. Not in a way that made me afraid. In a way that made me aware. Because deep down, I understood something now that I had not before. I did not just step into his world. He had stepped into mine. And neither of us was walking away from that.